welcome to the Omnia podcast. We used to say number such and such. I have no idea what number we're on, so we'll just say number X. Here with the wonderful Dr. Phil Price. Hello, Phil.
Hello. You right?
And we're gonna kind of get right into it. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we go, which is the usual. Actually, we should apologise for the lack of Fergus. Some of you may be delighted that he's not here. Most of you won't. Fergus is probably chasing hippopotamus or whatever else he might find on safari in South Africa. So we won't feel too sorry for him for not being here because he's obviously somewhere lovely. So, Phil, we're here today. We thought we'd have a chat around, in Fergus's absence, I suppose, around our experiences as parents, most particularly in reference to training. I suppose also we'll touch on the fact that we both have jobs that revolve around training in one way or another, training, academia, certainly strength and conditioning in one guise or another. And just from our experience, what we're doing to kind of work around that particular puzzle and where we find ourselves with it. What are the ups, what are the downs, what are the highs, and what are the lows? Happy with that?
Perfect. Let's do it.
I guess for anybody who doesn't know, it's worth introducing the scope or the context and explaining why we feel we're in any position at all to talk about parenting. Phil, you are a new parent, newish. How old's your little man now? You've got the one. Talk us through it.
Yeah, the little boy, Billy Boy, will be one on the 14th of February. He was born on Valentine's Day. So what day? It's the 6th today of February. So yeah, it's literally next week.
A week out then. Yeah. Blows my mind, that does. Again, Phil and I have known each other for a decent amount of time now, and the fact that your little man is going to be 1 year old makes me wonder what genuinely is happening with time, because it does seem like it was only a matter of weeks ago. And you'll feel the same way, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, it sneaks up
we were saying, congratulations, welcome to this new world. Being that Billy's turning one soon, you'll be at a point of kind of reflection, I suppose, and kind of a decent metric to say, you know, how far you've come in parenting, what you've learned, and how that does affect things. Are you kind of doing that at the moment? Are you kind of reflecting on that kind of thing, or are you just doing what I just did and saying it's unbelievable and I can't even compute it?
No, definitely. I think the biggest shock for me when I became a parent was just how it changed your perception of everything. I mean, even like not long after Billy was born and we were doing a few podcasts, and I would come up with questions or ideas for like podcast episodes for Omnia, and it all seemed to be geared around a new perspective of social media or this, that and the other. And it just completely changes your opinion on everything. And then you've got to take that into account when you are, I guess, balancing everything. Ultimately you want to, you know, keep pushing along with your career and everything else like that, but obviously you've got this brand new baby that you want to spend as much time with as possible, because every moment just feels absolutely great. So it goes back to just this ability of balance, I guess. And I guess that might be a bit of a common theme that we have in this discussion, because what I really like about hybrid training is, you know, you're not just adding two things together and just going for it. You are making decisions about what qualities do we need, and in changing things up so that we're just doing the training that we need to actually continue to improve in two separate domains. And I feel like those principles are probably very similar to how you just try and manage life in general, because I think we all want to do as many different things as possible, whether it be career, family, hobbies, whatever it might be. And it's just trying to find balance of how you can actually progress all of them simultaneously. So yes, it's probably something I haven't figured out fully just yet. I'm still learning. But it would be interesting to hear what your experience was when your kids were, you know, under a year old and balancing stuff then.
Yeah. It was interesting what you just said there, actually, where you say you're still figuring it out. And for anybody who doesn't know, we've got four children, and I'm still figuring it out, mate. This is why these discussions are always kind of fun for me, because I don't have the answers. And I guess that kind of extrapolates out into lots of the different discussions. I listened back on the podcast we just released today about our answers always being "it depends," and this isn't all that dissimilar. Is that, you know, you can give me your perspective as a brand new parent, and I guess you probably still regard yourself as being a brand new parent, even though you're a year down the line. Everything's learning, everything's changing. Those parameters change, the variables change. The more you know, you'll be getting to a point now where Billy, if he's not already, he's certainly likely to be ambulating, scooting about the place, finding his way to grab things. So now there's no longer X to worry about. There's X plus Y now, where you're considering, oh shit, he can reach stuff, or the noises are different and all the rest of it, which means you've then got to start again and work out what those things are. 4 kids down the line, and we're in a position now with our eldest, Poppy, where she's a young adult, really, and she's presenting new challenges for us. I mean that in a really positive way. She's an athlete, an extraordinarily gifted athlete in her own right now, and that then poses questions, because we then have to kind of facilitate the logistics around that, the finances around that, the time that I have to give to sort of coaching certain elements of it. So even though that's not the same area of learning as you're doing, it's still an area of learning. We're learning new things about Poppy and her needs, which then have to fit into my life. That's the priority, and then what I kind of do underneath it sits in a different kind of place. And yeah, it's kind of fun to know that you're going through a phase that I've been through before, but your experience in that phase will be different to mine. Plus, it doesn't mean I'm not doing, you know, a similar amount of learning. It's just in a different kind of in a different phase, in a different realm. So it's a never-ending learning, lesson learning kind of pathway. I think there's always. I think what's another thing interesting. I ramble on a little bit here, mate. Apologies, but is that what's fun about it? Talking to another parent as well is that although your kind of vantage point may be, and you know, this is me just throwing this out there, that Billy only just turning 1, you feel like you only have a certain amount of expertise, and would naturally think, well, Jonny with 4 kids probably has more expertise, and I'll kind of bow to that superior knowledge. But the reality is, I can probably learn a shit ton from what you're telling me about your experiences in what you're doing with Billy now, and think, oh, I can apply that. That's really good. I like his expertise here. I like his opinion. I like this fresh pair of eyes. Oh, that's something I'd forgotten to do, etc., etc. So it's like anything else. I think if you close yourself off and think, well, I've done that already, I know that already, then you're probably a fool. So the likelihood is that, you know, I don't know anything more than you do. I just happen to have been on that particular journey already, but, you know, the likelihood of me learning exactly what that journey entails would require me to do it 1,000 times and not just 4. So it's fun to experience it from you know, from your perspective as well. I guess there are practical considerations that you're going through at the moment. I certainly haven't. One of which is the sleep deprivation. Now I know Hayley, your better half, will be possibly suffering from that more than you do, given the nature of a mother versus a father, and you know how those duties kind of pan out. That's a guess as opposed to a prescription on my part, but it generally is the case. But you will still be suffering from a certain amount of fatigue in that sense. Are you finding that difficult to factor in, or have you gotten kind of a grasp on you kind of touched on it earlier on in the sense that you didn't refer to it this way, but I suppose you've got to consider Billy in the nicest possible sense as being another external factor that can add stress, and therefore one of those stresses is extra fatigue, and you kind of have to factor it in. How's that affected you?
It's certainly affected me on changing my routine. I think the level of tiredness has just remained the same. You know, 6 months ago, probably getting up 3-4 times a night. And then now it's 1, maybe 2. It's been more recently because he had an ear infection. But you still feel the same level of tiredness for some strange reason. And I was always very good at getting up very early and working in the morning. Like that time between 5 a.m., let's say 7 a.m. Like I was very good at just sort of like concentrating. Everything's quiet. It was just amazing to get some real deep creative work done, particularly around writing. But all of a sudden, as soon as you've got a kid, that time between 4 and 6, where their sleep is so light, like it's just gone. And if you've been up 3 or 4 times in the night, all of a sudden your time when you're very creative sort of goes because you're knackered, and you just need that extra hour. So, yeah, I mean, that and changing it around, trying to find a routine that works is, I think I'm still going through it. But my wife is back at work now. She is head of therapies at a hospital. So she's got a really, really sort of like intense job, which requires her to, well, she works 4 days a week, but she does long days. So the dynamic of, looking after Billy has completely changed, because she will go to work really early and I stay and look after Billy until my mother-in-law comes along, and who's pretty much our nanny as well. So yeah, all of a sudden I've gone from a morning where I may be able to get work in. Sometimes I didn't, but now I don't really, because I have a different role for that particular bit. So all of a sudden the routine has to completely change as well. And I think the best thing about it has just been how much I've enjoyed it. Like, all of a sudden you're getting different responsibilities, even though the responsibility of your child is exactly the same, but because of how work dynamics change, your responsibilities at different times of the day change. And it's just great how I think positively I've responded to that. You can imagine maybe some people will be like, I just need to get on with work, that type of thing. Whereas I need to get on with work, but I don't let that fester in my head at all, because I've got like this precious 2 hours before my mother-in-law gets in, where I just get to play with my boy. And then, once the day's over, again, I get to play with my boy as well. Makes trying to fit in training much more difficult, but it's changed my perception of what I want to push with hybrid training at the moment. And ultimately I liked using hybrid training to try and figure things out. I don't see myself as like a Fergus where I'm, an excellent athlete. And it kind of ties into when we talked about the difference between like being a generalist versus being like a really pushing hybrid athlete. I guess I'm in the generalist particular stage, or just going through GPP, the very general sort of training, because how the best way to describe it, it isn't my main focus at the moment. My main focus is kind of work and my family, and hopefully in the future, when routines change, that will be able to push that side of things, I'll be able to. But I don't want to do that at the expense of the other things which I rank as more important at this specific point in time. So, you could say I'm a generalist, hybrid athlete, whatever you might be, but I have a certain amount of time during the week now which I can attribute to training, and I don't beat myself up that I can't push that even more because of time, because I have, other great things that I look forward to more at the moment.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Firstly, really, really good to hear that, and you kind of touched on it earlier on in that when a child comes along, and not to bore people that haven't got children or anything, but it is something that's kind of interesting to hear. I think anyway, is that your perspective or your sense of self, or how you see yourself in the grand scheme of things, shifts ever so slightly. You are no longer. I mean, from a philosophical perspective, you probably still are the center of your universe. Otherwise, you couldn't operate from a point of control. But your priorities within yourself are no longer singular. You have relationships, strong relationships. You're married, but it's still from the perspective of how does this serve the universe within which I operate. But a child comes along and shifts that, whether or not your philosophy, expected that or not. I don't think there's any other rational way to react to the fullness of love that comes along with having a child. So what can then happen is that shift happens, but how you adapt to that shift can be really very difficult. Some people don't. And although from my own experience, looking back on when I first became a dad, I didn't handle that particularly well, certainly not as well as you are, in that I found it very confusing. I was trying very hard to achieve very specific things athletically at the time. And although I didn't see it as a nuisance or a hindrance, I wasn't very good at then allowing is probably the wrong word, figuring out how to put that puzzle together, how to continue to try and excel at what I was doing at the same time as trying to excel at a father. And I think that in of itself is an issue that took me a while to come to terms with, because I didn't really have to excel. I just had to give in to the love and not try and, oh my God, here's another piece to stack on top. It was a case of, no. What you need to do is adjust and look at all those pieces very differently. If I was able to go back, I'm not one for regret at all, but it's an interesting lesson to learn. If I could go back, I would probably look at it and say, well, although you are pushing for certain things, there is going to be no harm at all in easing off the throttle here, whilst you learn who you are in this new setup. And I've seen it in many athletes actually. Good friend of mine, high level Muay Thai fighter, became a dad recently and suddenly couldn't find his fire in professional fights. He was no longer connected to the fight anymore, and it was because once we really dug deep, he was tapping into the risk. He suddenly realized that the risk to him was now no longer just a risk to him; it was a risk to his family, and he hadn't even consciously kind of thought of that. He was just subconsciously thinking, "Oh shit! If I take a punch to the head, it means X, Y, and Z," as opposed to So that's what I was doing as well, was trying to figure these things out. So it's really cool to hear that you've been able to see that a little bit further off and find the ways through that and reduce that kind of throttle where training is concerned, possibly because, like you say, you weren't in a position, or you hadn't put yourself in a position where you needed to achieve a certain thing. Therefore, you're able to say, well, I can, maintenance is fine, or certainly, as you say, GPP is fine until such times as a pattern has formed that allows me that little bit more opportunity to kind of open up in that front. I think that would be good advice for any new parent is just to take the time, sit back, really address those priorities without putting yourself right in I want, doesn't necessarily cover all these things, which again, I'm happy to be honest about. I hadn't really kind of factored that particularly well. But it's an interesting one to learn, isn't it? It's an interesting one to kind of come up against because ultimately Poppy won out. Ultimately, and rightly so, I gave in to the absolute need to just give that love, and the training did take a backseat. It just took me a little longer than it probably should have done to figure that out, which then caused its own stress because I felt like I was kind of failing at everything. But that's a fun one to look back on, but wasn't particularly fun at the time. So it's good to hear that you're managing that from a time blocking perspective, which is a phrase I've been using much more recently. Did you find that you naturally found that? I think there's a few factors that you mentioned that probably play into this. The availability of your mother-in-law perhaps being one, the timeline that your wife had before she had to go back to work, or before she chose to go back to work, I suppose, would have been another. Giving up that kind of real creative period, like you say, that early morning creative period might have been a third factor. But were you able to kind of look at all those different pieces and say, well, if we move this one around the board a little bit, then this works better? Or did you have to let that kind of organically fall into place and go, oh, this works, this is one we'll stick with? So did you proactively manage that or sort of reactively figure it out, if that makes sense?
Probably both. And the reason being is that I think I proactively tried to change things and it didn't always go to plan. So then because it didn't go to plan, you're then reactive to the response of what happened. Yeah, I'm kind of trying all different things in terms of routine. If we're talking about training and blocking time out, I think one of the easiest times to actually train would be when, I don't know, say your kid's asleep during their naps during the day or in the evening. But our gym is directly underneath his bedroom, which so we couldn't use it because he would just wake up. Yeah, cool. Any just like re-racking of the bar particularly just ends up making too much noise, and so what we've done now is we had to drop our gym membership. We were supposed to move house, which contributed to like differences in routine. We were supposed to move house, and that fell through. So we're still going through that process. Once that happens, probably routines will be even easier to sort of organize in terms of work and training and general lifestyle. But we haven't got that at the moment. And what we've done in the meantime is we've actually signed up to a gym. It's a hotel gym. So it's linked with a mini pool, sauna, steam room, that type of thing. And what happens is on a Monday night, I put Billy to sleep. My wife goes to the gym. Tuesday night, I go to the gym. My wife puts Billy to sleep. And we just take it in turns. And then we try and do other bits of training around here if we can get it in. But it just gives us that bit of time to get a bit of training in and also have a bit of chill out time to try and decompress from the pressures of work. I mean, they've got loads of different things going on in my work. My wife has a particularly stressful job managing like hundreds of people. So I think it's just generally needed. So in terms of training, we just, changed our perception of what it needed to be at the time, and that helped develop that routine, is that it's very much from a hybrid / general, just what you enjoy type training to make you feel better, to get through a time when, lack of sleep, you're busy juggling so many different things, that it just makes you feel better. And then, because there's no point trying to put on like real competitive stress if you don't have that kind of healthy lifestyle background underneath it, because then you just sort of burn out, or there's a number of different things that could happen. So it's just kind of like an awareness of that. I just don't have that capacity to do that now. And, I'm absolutely fine with it. The only time I've really been, not fought it or anything like that, is that obviously we push in our careers. You've got Omnia, I've got, let's say, the progress theory, I've got my stuff at the university, and we do live in a bit of an environment, unfortunately, that people really go, oh, that person knows what they're doing. Look what they're doing. The visualness of you performing as an athlete, say on social media, leads people to then think that, oh, this person really knows what they're doing. But, being an athlete is only one component of it. So, me not being as much of an athlete as I potentially could be at the moment did make me start to think, well, what if people start to, not really engage with what I say? Is there a lack of belief in what I know because, oh, this guy doesn't have skin in the game? I said, well, I kind of do have skin in the game. It's just on pause a little bit more at the moment. So I fought with that a little bit, because I didn't want, if you look at Instagram, the posts that do well, the ones where you're training and doing incredible PRs, that's why people really push that type of thing. But I think I've come to terms with that, because there's just better things to think about. I think,
it's difficult to sell. Well, I didn't train today because I was covered in shit.
Yeah, I got pissed on, I missed half an hour of my training, whatever. So I guess that's the only thing I really, I don't know, I don't want to call it struggled with, but it definitely was playing on my mind a little bit more, because I lost quite a bit of weight because I wasn't training as much. And actually, just to kind of like add a little conclusion to that, when I was coaching before becoming a father, I was leaning so much more into, okay, let's see what your lifestyle's like. How many hours can you dedicate to train? And then you make the program based on that. Whereas before, it's just like, okay, this is the program, try and fit it around your stuff, around your lifestyle. And it doesn't always work that way, but that's fine, because sometimes you can auto-regulate, make changes, etc., etc. But I started going the other way. It's like, okay, how much time do you have? Because I didn't want to put additional stress by trying to just force them to do too much based on their sort of lifestyle and logistics. And now that I've got, now I'm a parent, I really believe in that as like a strategy to really gain buy-in from the client and all of that type of thing. So it's definitely helped my perception of what's important when making decisions for someone's program. Yeah,
that's really interesting, because ultimately that's where I kind of arrived at, and I guess that's a kind of a nice synchronization of the thought processes as two separate parents, and this not a prepared conversation at all. So that was my conclusion, and actually I think it's an interesting journey, because it lends itself, I think that makes you a better coach. What you're describing to me there, parenting aside, is that you've had a chance to kind of consider coaching just a little bit more holistically, and you think, well, actually this is a much more healthy way to go about it, and actually probably get more from those athletes if you're to do it that way. And that was the solution to my particular problems as well. It's like, well, okay, rather than saying this is the amount of work I need to get done training wise, I'm going to have to try and shoehorn that in and push things this way and push things that way to make it happen, and then accept the guilt that maybe comes with not having been particularly present in situation A, or the poor feedback, the relationship kind of bend that might come with, saying, well, I can't turn up for such and such because I damn well have to train, and these kind of slightly selfish choices, very selfish choices, I suppose, gave way to this, like, actually, let's look at what the real life priorities are. Let's look at what I can do. And two words I've used in this little dialogue that I hate. One was holistic. I just used a second ago. I'm about to use optimize. But let's look at how we can kind of optimize all the things that we have going on. But certainly prioritize them from the top down. And the priority is the children. The priority is the relationship, and the things you need to do to maintain that are going to be work. You need to be able to attend to your work, and therefore keep the wolf from the door in that sense as well. And I guess that's the order it has to come in. Am I present as a parent? Am I present as a partner and supporting my partner in his or her parenting duties? That has to come first. How does my relationship with my work, if you're employed or relationship with the people you work with, how can that move around to make sure that these things are prioritized well? Once that's in place, what things I can do? And training hasn't even factored in yet. So the next stage for me was, what can I do to ensure that if and when I get to training, I've made sure that my lifestyle is speaking to these things. So am I leaning into the idea of, well, I am absolutely knackered and I'm stressed, so a couple of beers won't harm? Or should I be thinking, well, actually, probably the best thing to do here is to manage my diet and manage my sleep as best I can. So what are the hours that I need for that? And ultimately, you go through these things and get to the point where training sits within that hierarchy and say, so what time have I got left for training? And if that turns out to be, you mentioned kind of a back and forth with your wife about, day one she'll go, day two you'll go, which I guess amounts to 3, maybe 4 days a week training for you, and you might have been doing 6 days a week. How much time you get to do that might drop back. So you might end up with somebody that was doing 2 to 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, only have half an hour, 4 days a week. And rather than going, oh my God, I've lost X amount of time, what you should be then doing is go, okay, how best can I strategize and optimize, there's that word again, that half an hour session in these particular times. So what is the priority within my training program? What is the priority outcome? What am I trying to achieve? We've talked on previous podcasts about the degradation rate of certain physical characteristics. So can I look at strength as being something I can maintain over a 30-day period? So maybe only 2 of those sessions over the course of 14 days needed to be dedicated to top-end strength, because power is going to degrade faster. So should I put X, Y, Z? And you can work through it and say, okay, the 3 sessions I've got here can be dedicated to power, sport-specific work, and maintaining my aerobic capacity. And you can probably do that within a half an hour dedicated session. And maybe if you're lucky, you get an hour out to do your list or whatever it might be. But rather, that is going to give you a much better outcome within all those things I just mentioned within that priority. Your relationship is much, much better. The love that you're giving to the child is much, much better. Your interaction with that's much better because it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like it's being compromised. And actually, if you've done that maths, you've looked at that sort of scientifically or practically rather, then your sessions might end up being actually a little bit more focused than they had been in the very first place, because now you're forced to say what is important here, rather than I have the luxury of 2 to 3 hours and I'm just used to doing that. Therefore, you pop out the other end as a better parent, as a better contributor, as a better individual to be in a relationship with, and quite possibly as a better athlete. And you certainly should be learning lessons. But it boils down to that kind of, which you guys sound like you've done very well. And I'm sure I'm kind of skipping over the errors and the trips and the falling on your face that you've probably done to get there. But the fact is that if you do that work, and it can be pretty easy with a pen and paper, frankly, but if you do that work, come out the other end and say, this is what I've got time for, and make sure to factor in downtime as well, which is vitally important. Time just to, used to call it fire watching. There was a phase of time where people called it fire watching, just to sit and kind of do nothing and relax, get all that in. And then what have I got left? And the likelihood is you've got a decent amount left and you can get a lot done. But without doing that work, you're probably going to do what I did for quite some time. Not for a huge amount of time, but certainly for enough time for me to think I could have done that better, and chase your tail, get things wrong, and actually end up in a situation where you're not recovering, you're not doing all those things well at all, and therefore you might as well fucking just do a couple of those bits well and forget the rest, So
Yeah.
I'm really, really pleased to hear that you guys are in that position where you're kind of finding that, or you certainly sound like you've found a sort of a peace with the things that you can't do, as opposed to being frustrated at those things, which is very cool.
It's unnecessary headspace, isn't it? If you're just be frustrated at something you can't control. So you might as well just change your perception of them, and then all of a sudden they're not there. You're like, oh, why was I ever annoyed about that type of thing beforehand?
Yeah.
So it's a nice feeling because you do feel a bit lighter. And One thing I'd be cool to see what you think about this. It's improved my, what I call session density. You've got half an hour. So it's like, okay, what can you fit in that half an hour? So all of a sudden, I'm doing the same amount of stuff that potentially I could have taken 45 minutes, 50 minutes to do, but I'm doing it in half an hour because I know I just don't have the time. But the outcome from doing it in 30 minutes to doing it in 50 minutes, physiologically, probably isn't that much difference. However, the outcome logistically and how I feel and relationships, etc., considerably better. So it's certainly it's changed my perception on, this idea of like, oh, you don't have enough time to train. You don't have enough time to, really, really improve. I mean, I know that I'm kind of viewing training as kind of the GPP part, but that's because I'm trying to take away the pressure of dealing with a number of other different things, family, work, all of that type of thing. But that doesn't mean that if I, change certain things, I could potentially, really focus on my training, but still only have the same amount of training, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm trying something just because, like I say, I always want my training to be a bit more like a scientific N=1 random study, which could go nowhere, but it's just, I just find it interesting. So my aim is what happens if I did the same squat session every week, just once a week, and I added 1 kilo to my top working set, which I work up to, I started at 150 kilos, it was just worked up to 1 rep, and then I've added 1 kilo each week. I've only got to 153 at the moment, purely because I played rugby and damaged my AC joint, so I haven't been able to have it on my back. And so I thought, well, there's no point just adding another kilo. That's not trying to emphasize the point I'm trying to make, and which is that I could get a really good session within a short amount of time, and it highlights this idea of progressing slowly. Because with hybrid training, you're doing, all this strength work, all this endurance work, really we should make very small changes. And the idea is that each week we start to feel better. We move heavier weights faster, all of those types of things. So progressing slowly may on paper feel like, oh, I'm not moving fast enough, but really it's like, yeah, you're adapting at the right pace. So you don't necessarily have to go like push for 4 weeks, then you need a deload, then another 4 weeks, then you need a deload. No, really, you can just progress slowly. So my idea behind this squat thing is, okay, it's something I can do, but it also is trying to prove a point. So the idea really, because there's 52 weeks in a year, I don't know what's going to happen, but could I creep up to get towards 200 kilos by just doing the same session every week? Maybe. Am I going to get to a point where I plateau? Or because when I plateau, I'm just going to sort of stay at that weight and just, try and, let's say I plateaued at 170 and I managed to stay at 170 for 3 or 4 weeks. And then all of a sudden I see another spike because I've just adapted to it. My body caught up. So I don't know what I'm going to end up on, but I think it's just an interesting idea to try, really. So yeah, we'll see.
Milo of Croton, the stick a bull in your back.
Yeah, just that we're just feeding that bull just that little bit each day.
Exactly. Yeah. The interesting thing that you've done there as well, and this is probably a podcast for another time that we can really expand on this. It's the idea of you're simply playing with progressive overload, aren't you? And not buying into the kind of push, step back, push, super compensation kind of theory, which clearly has merit. But you could sit. Theoretically, if your 1 rep max, if your 10 rep max was 100 kilos, you don't need to put any more weight on that for bloody months. You could just do your, work that weight, because the speed at which you'll increase your physical capability isn't going to be so vast that, within week 2 you're doing 12, week 3 you're doing 14 reps, week 5. It's not, you can't get strong that quick. So you could arguably stay at that 10 reps for 2 to 3 months. And what it would do would be maybe take your RPE 8 down to an RPE 7, maybe an RPE 6. Then you put a little bit more weight on, drop it back up. So, stick with the same rep range. And you're now working at RPE 8 again. Over the course of 3-4 months, you're only going to put, 5% on top of that original 100 kilos anyway. Just what 105 kilos. So you the all you're doing the same thing clearly by the sounds of it, but you give yourself that sort of incremental incentive of saying, well, there's another kilo. It's not really going to do much to the actual sets. It's not going to do much to your form, to your skill capability. But it allows you the knowledge week on week, that kind of touch point, for because people find it hard, the way I've described it, to stick to the same thing over and over and over, because we always feel like we want to progress, but progression doesn't actually happen in that fashion, which is why most programs, ours included, will have a kind of a step structure that allows you to lift, and then step back up, and then lift. But really, when you work out the averages of that, you're still working around about 65-70% of your top end over the whole time. You might do 85 for 4, and then 90 for 3, and then 95 for 2, which that's the same bloody number, isn't it? when you consider it. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I quite like the fact that at least for you probably will plateau at a certain point, but then you can just stay at that point and wait until that RPE drops and then go again. It's just obviously incremental increases will slow over time, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. What happens is people just become that little bit kind of, it's not shiny enough. But, oh no, we need to do this thing over here. Oh no, if you stick with what you're doing and just consistent, slow progression, then you're likely to get there faster, I would say, because you're not fanning about with things that actually don't matter so much. Yeah. But again, bringing it back to the parenting theme, is that you've probably had two things to touch on then, and maybe a good way to wrap this up is that you've probably had the opportunity to reflect on that. But one of the very key things you said, which I liked for two reasons, was that you were then forced to say, and I talked about it as well, is what is the actual point of this session? What can I get? What's the best dose response? What's the biggest bang for the buck I can get within this now shortened period of time? So I was talking about 2-hour sessions, which were fundamentally useless. I was fanning about and doing, things that I didn't need to do and talking to people, and just felt like that was my training time. In actual fact, a good 50% of it was just nonsense, So you've done the same. You break it down, and maybe could I superset things in order to actually get a little bit more done with it? There's all kinds of ways to play with things to make it fit within that. But ultimately, the goal has to be, what is the session outcome? What is the best I can do? What is the best I can achieve here? Digress for a moment. We used to have, or when I did direct one-to-one in-person coaching for a long time, sometimes the session plan didn't require much more than 15-20 minutes of actual work. But because people had paid for an hour with me, I then had a pressure on me to fill 40 minutes with fluff in order to make them feel like they had got their hours worth. And it was really difficult in all but the most advanced athletes to explain to the person, you've got everything you need out of this time with me. Everything else is actually wasting your time. So it's the same thing, isn't it? It's like saying to yourself, okay, so if I've only got X amount of time, what's the best way to use it? And I think the flip of that is it then allows you, when you get back and you get your momentum back yourself with your coaching, and you have that opportunity to be back with your clients after having become a new parent, you're then a better coach because you've had the opportunity to look at things from a widened perspective, and you have different thought process. And you've described that really well. So I think the gift of parenting is a gift that keeps going if you look at it well. And the other part of that is that you're probably actually going to end up on a very personal level with more out of that training program now, because you are it's a magnified responsibility. You have to make it right, as opposed to, I can do lots and lots of things, and you're not really going anywhere in any particular way. So yeah, I guess the kind of conclusion there for me is you probably don't need to enter into this discussion with children or with any need nor will to have children, but you can still learn quite a lot of lessons from what that perspective gives you, which is an interesting kind of byproduct, if you like, of being a parent.
Yeah, I think being the parent has made me realise what things I was doing wrong, and a lot of that was just not probably too much fluff. I wasn't as good as identifying what was the most important bit, and what am I adding on because I feel like it's maybe supporting it all, but maybe how confident am I that it's supporting it? Maybe just stopping and resting might have been even better. But I think that's probably one of the key things that I've learned from parenting. What would you say being a parent, especially because you've got 4? What's been the key piece of information you've taken from being a parent that you feel has been best applied to your hybrid training and coaching?
I think we've actually just touched on it, mate. I think that the very specific thing that we've just discussed probably is actually the biggest lesson I've learned. So, at risk of repeating, well, not at risk, I am going to repeat myself. I think the thing that it's done is it's forced me to focus on what's important. On one side of the equation, at home, forced me to focus better on that. But certainly forced me as a professional to focus on how best to deliver what it is I'm supposed to be delivering, as opposed to, like I said, a 20-minute session versus a 1-hour session. Are you just doing 40 minutes of nothing for the sake of filling that session up? And that applies to the individual as well, doesn't it? It's something that we think from a hybrid perspective is very, very important, is making sure that we remove, and to use your word, the fluff, to get rid of the things that are extracurricular and don't really add much, is vital to put together a hybrid program. So if we've got a few if you're just doing one thing, you're not really interested in strength training and you're just an endurance athlete, then junk miles for the sake of doing them can probably be useful, probably additive to a certain sense. And the word junk is no longer applicable. But when you want to put your strength work in and your endurance work in together and create this kind of hybrid profile, you're then going to have to say, well, what is the fluff? Does this count as fluff? Does that count as fluff? So parenting allowed me to really focus in on understanding, certainly within my own programming, and then I was able to extrapolate out and look at it from a professional perspective in a more objective manner, and say, this is unnecessary. This is unnecessary. The session plan, what we want to achieve from this particular session here today is X, and we are limited by time. In a non-parenting situation, we're limited by time simply because we want to optimize recovery, and parenting kind of adds the same pressure. It's like, well, I need to optimize time as a parent. So from the session plan perspective, the same has to be done. What can I remove and what can I optimize? And so parenting kind of allowed there to be a different lens to look at that same problem and come up with a solution that ultimately benefits the whole thing. So I think that really has been a very useful thing, because that's a good way to put it, is that it forced me, as you described eloquently at the beginning, to have a very different perspective and therefore a different lens on things, which meant I had to look at training differently, which meant I had to look at coaching differently, which meant I had to consider the whole methodological process very differently. There's no coincidence that my immersion into hybrid coaching and the hybrid methodology that I've constructed came almost at the same time as our first baby did. It's like, okay, this has to be done right. There is no room for tinkering and faffing and fucking about with things that aren't relevant. It has to be only what it's supposed to be. And once it became that, once it's polished and it's honed and it's sharp, it's a shit ton better and it moves better. So, I think that's probably the main gift that parenting's given to me is it's certainly made me a better coach, but certainly allowed me that lens to kind of tinker with things to make them sharper.
That's really cool to hear. I mean, I know you kind of talked about it, and then it's like, actually, no, that is the number one thing. And especially if you link it back to, you said that you started developing, sharpening these hybrid programs roughly at the same time as your first child. Like, that's quite a cool story if you think about it. So I did this, I became a parent, and then it's developed this to this next level. It shows how powerful it is, really becoming a parent.
It really does, because if you just look at the dynamic, if before Poppy was around, I'm training, I had time to do strength training, I had time to relax, I had time to, do whatever the hell I liked. I was completely under my own steam, and then I could do a longer run, time to recover, time to play with that timeline, do what I liked. Once I had that extra consideration, I'm like, no, I've only got X amount of time, but I still want to do both things. I can only recover so much now. How do I make this work? And actually, I'm not the only one. People that don't have children still have that same outcome demand. The stressors might be different, but the outcome's the same, or the hopeful outcome's the same. So how do we manipulate that to make it right and reduce that kind of noise around it? And yeah, so the outcome becomes what we are now. So thanks, Poppy. Everybody involved in Omnia owes a great deal of gratitude to Poppy Payne. I'll make her listen to this, at least the last minute of this podcast.
Poppy Performance. Just change the name of the whole company.
Exactly.
Make it seem like real organic.
That's it. That's maybe what we'll call the podcast. I'm sure she'll hate it. So I think that's probably a good point to end, mate. I think we've kind of had a good play around. We could sit and talk probably for hours about being parents and the joy that it brings, but I'm sure nobody tunes into Omnia to hear about you talk about Billy and me talk about our four in a overtly over the top fashion. So
yeah,
we won't do that.
But I'm hoping that a lot of people listen to this and just kind of relate. So I remember going through that, or I remember all of a sudden all of these things would happen. I just couldn't manage training the way I wanted to. But I've come out the other side a better coach, a better athlete, because I just learnt to highlight what's important. So, I mean, we could probably have like quite a few people that we know on this podcast and have like a big old round table. And I'm assuming some of the comments or the stories would be relatively the same, or the lessons that we've learnt have been relatively the same, and we can kind of like resonate with each other. So
yeah, and like any other situation, I think that if we did get a round table discussion with other parents in the field, there'd be little things that they would, again, like I said at the beginning, just because I've got four doesn't make me any more of an expert than you, but there'll be things that person one versus person four might say that oh my God, that's a gem, that is, so it's great. But I think you're right. I think the theme would remain the same, is that, we're all, the perspective and the lens gives you an opportunity to kind of reframe things really, really well. So it's a gift in that sense. So we'll end the podcast on a put you under the spotlight a little bit. If you were, I know you might feel like you're not qualified. You are for sure. If you were to give one piece of advice to a new parent trying to consider how to manage all these things at once, what would it be?
Okay, I'm going to think quite broadly with this one. I actually put this up as a post recently, and I think it applies here because it helped me certainly with direction and making immediate choices based on long-term decisions. So I did a newsletter I put out as an Instagram post as well around choosing life, not goals. Now, the reason I had that title is that I've always been very goal-driven. Like, I want to do this, I want to do that. Hard work is not my problem, but balancing thing probably is my problem. I'm not as good at doing that as I probably thought I was. But I realised that, especially now Billy's here and changes and setup that we've got, I look into the future and think, okay, if I achieved all of these goals, say I've got 5 of them, what would my life look like? And I start to think, well, actually, the amount of work that I'd have to be here, there and everywhere, what I would have to do would then not reflect the life that I would want to live. I think I would miss out on certain things. So all of a sudden, I started thinking, well, shouldn't I think about, okay, what's my ideal lifestyle that I want to live in the next 10, 15 years? And then work back from that. So even though the goals are relatively similar, my perception of where they're going is a little bit different because they're going towards a specific lifestyle that I want, rather than I'm just going to be the best at this. I'm going to be the top in this. And it's helped me reframe decisions now in terms of what is actually important. So that would be my recommendation, because having that long direction goal of a lifestyle I want to live, rather than just like a selection of important goals, allow me to reframe my current goals, which actually puts into perspective what's important right now. And then I use that to try and balance work, life, and training. So that's probably my recommendations.
Phil, I thought I was putting you on the spot there and ended up with a pearl of wisdom. Like I said at the very beginning, there'd be plenty we can learn. I love that, mate.
I think it was a recent newsletter, so it was on the top of my top of my head.
Yeah, it's obviously something you've thought about before. But that's brilliant. I really, really like that. I think I feel stupid now because I don't know what to say.
Oh, it must be a pearl of wisdom you can give us now. Come on.
No, not. Well, I mean, mine's much more simple, but it falls under the same category. It's just to relax. I think that my own. Before I forget to say it again, I really like what you just said, Phil. If we can extract that out, Jamie's on the other side of the monitor here, and give that as a gift to people, it'd be brilliant because it's great advice. Thank you for that. But from my perspective, yeah, just relax. My own troubles came from not being able to do so, from exactly as you've just described. But I need to achieve X, Y, and Z. I felt like I was kind of whatever it was I had in my mind that was important felt like it was slipping away from me. There was certainly no blame or consternation as a parent from that perspective, but it did feel like it was slipping away. And my struggle was how to fix it all. I think if I could give that, take that away for somebody else, it would be simply with the, and it's easy to say, not easy to do, but just relax. There's a very old, very old Roman saying, enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. Jules Holland used to always sing that, at Hogmanay. But it rings very true for me. Listen, if you force this, if you try too hard, if you pull too hard, I mean, obviously competition and striving for things and goals are great, and I'm a big fan. But you squeeze the bird too hard, you're going to kill it. It's got to be something that you've got to find that perspective, allow yourself the opportunity to think there is time, be patient, relax. If I had allowed myself the time to relax 6-9 months, maybe even a year, it wasn't as if the goals I was achieving were going to go anywhere. I could have just chilled out and enjoyed that first year as a parent instead of trying to do everything all at once. And I think that's genuinely good advice if people can get a hold of it. And we've got a few friends of the brand and people that work with us. Scott here, our media manager, if that's to give him his right title, our creative genius, is going to be a father soon, and the best advice I'll be able to give him is don't worry about training, just relax. Training will still be there afterwards, and just really immerse yourself in the love of it, which seems soft, but it's good advice, I think. But we'll sit that one underneath yours, which I think was a pearl of wisdom not to be missed, Phil. Listen, I've really enjoyed it, genuinely enjoyed it. It's fun to chat about these things and to get somebody else's perspective, and really nice to find that we've both found that kind of perspective shift that's brought us to a place where we feel like we're that bit more productive, better coaches, and hopefully better people, which I suppose philosophically is what it's all about, isn't it? Yeah. So thank you for today.
Thank you.
And thank you for the conversation. Hope it's been of value to anybody listening. If it has, the usual applies. Give us a like, share it, do all those things that you need to do, or send us a postcard telling us how much you love us, whatever you need to do. But for now, thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening.